Okay, welcome guys to the second chapter of our class, and today we will deal with the equipment of our character. First I want to start with the easy stuff, and because of that I reckon we will start with the shield. It's a fairly simple workflow, and on this simple example you can see how I approach building pretty much any type of the equipment. So the shield, as you know, is pretty much just a cylinder. Let's first use the gizmo to move it and to scale it to our liking. I think it can be a bit thinner. As you may or may not remember, I'm gonna repeat that. To measure a scale, you're gonna have to go to the move tool and then turn off the gizmo right here, and you want to type in inside the calibration distance height of your character. Let's type 32, as we have 32 millimeters, and for anything that is as big as a shield we don't really want to go lower than 1 millimeter in the thickness. As you can see, we have almost 2 millimeters, so that's plenty enough. Let me switch back to the shield, and I can keep scaling it to my liking as long as I don't cross that threshold of 1 millimeter. Okay, I think that will be closer to what I want. Okay, as you can see, it's slightly more than 1 millimeter. It's alright, we're gonna add some more thickness to it anyway in a minute, so that's perfectly fine. I think that size is alright as well. In the miniatures you always want to make equipment slightly bigger, because basically when you print it out and it's so tiny on the table, having bigger equipment makes sure that it's easily read as the intended item, as well as basically it looks cooler if the guy has sword quite a bit bigger than it would be in the normal life in 1:1 scale. So basically make equipment a bit bigger than you would for your computer game or anything like that. Now shield is usually wooden, but to protect the edges from damage it usually has metal rim around it. There's of course plenty of ways we can do this in, but my favorite is a bit of a cheating really, but that's alright. I'm gonna append a ring 3D, so again append ring 3D, and I'm gonna position it roughly to where the our shield is. To make sure that alignment is okay, we can hide our anatomy model. We won't need it for a while now, and I'm gonna hit transparent mode, which is going to let us to see better the edges of our mesh. So we want to make it a bit larger than the shield itself. And now I'm gonna use a little trick. I'm gonna use a combination of inflate and scaling basically to get the results I want. So I used inflate slider and moved it slightly to the left to make sure that the rim is slightly is roughly the size of what I want it to be. Okay, let's see here, it's roughly in the correct position, so that's good enough for us. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna elongate it on this axis, which is the axis. And why I'm doing this is because I want the edges to be super sharp, and right now they were very round. So if you stretch it like this and then you use the trick that I showed you before, which is to hold Control and drag on this rectangular, it's gonna cut your mesh. So just like this. Again, if your ZBrush is jumping around, back and forth like this, it means that you have to move gizmo outside to work properly, like this. And the same from the other side, control and drag. Again, you might want to move your gizmo to this side to ensure it works properly, like that. Okay. Again, move your gizmo if it works a bit weird. I reckon that's alright. Okay. That's roughly the effect I wanted to get. And with that being said, I'm gonna now add more details to it. So a bit more advanced feature is Z-modeler, but it's very useful when you are doing something as geometrically simple as this. So I'm gonna introduce it right now. I usually don't start with this. I like to start with a primitive like we did with the ring this time, and now I'm gonna edit it slightly with Z-modeler brush. Actually, you know what guys, I'm gonna leave it for later. For now, let's just use a bit more basic features. I'm gonna show you how the Z-modeler works when we will move on to the belt actually. So I'm gonna show you as many methods to reaching your goal as possible. So instead of going into Z-modeler quite yet, let's activate symmetry on the Z-axis, which is the one we used, and to add to that I'm gonna use radial symmetry, and I'm gonna add radial count. And as you can see, it increases the number of points we are using. As you can see, it's now not really aligned with my shield. That's because I don't have local symmetry on. When you enable local symmetry, it should work better. Our geometry is a bit low, so I'm gonna use Dynamesh real quick. It's a bit too low resolution, so I'm gonna undo that with Ctrl Z. I'm gonna push the slider a bit to the right. I reckon about 1000 should be okay. Yeah, looks alright now. With this kind of geometry we can have some fun and actually start sculpting with our brushes. So I'm gonna increase the radial count even more. It doesn't really matter what number you have. I'm gonna go to 60, and now as you can see we have this many points around the shield. I'm gonna use trim dynamic because I think it's the best brush to take off sharp edges like this, and I'm gonna just move it like this. This is very simple use of this brush, but very effective in the situation we find here. And as you can see, it's very effective. I'm gonna switch to H polish because it's a bit better when polishing the surface, just like this. And you can do the final tweaks to the shapes. Maybe even more so on the inside as well. Something like this will be enough. Okay. I think that's enough. Okay, and now using the same feature of the symmetry, we're gonna add some rivets to our shield. In the usual game you would probably use spheres, but for miniatures everything that has sharp features reads a lot better. So I'm gonna use cylinder instead, and I didn't really want 60 of them. Let's try maybe 15 as a good starting point, or actually 16, so that we are symmetrical on all axes. Okay, that's a bit more like it, and I'm gonna use this slider here to change the depth of the placement of the brush. So usually it's like this, and as you can see it places on the surface, and if you adjust it to about like this, it's gonna place on the middle of the surface rather than on top of it. So that's great. I think it's a bit too big actually, so I'm gonna undo that and I'm gonna make it a bit smaller Probably something like this is enough. Now to copy this to the other side, I'm gonna reset orientation of my gizmo by holding Alt key and clicking on this arrow. And now I'm gonna hold Control to copy and drag it to the front of the shield as well. Control and drag on the canvas to clear the mask, and we have most of our shield done. If it was supposed to be a very simple shield, I would say it can be done even at this stage, but if you want to continue adding some details to it, we can do that. So I'm gonna switch to the core of the shield. As you can see, it's on the inside. I'm gonna center my gizmo and reset the orientation by clicking on those two icons inside the gizmo. And now I'm gonna make it a bit thinner like this. I know I mentioned before that it should be at least 1 millimeter, and I'm only making it thinner because I want to add another layer next to the original one. So I'm gonna hit duplicate right here and move a new layer here. So we have the original one and the one that we duplicated. If you're wondering why I did this, is I just want to create some wooden boards to add some details. So we have our original one, and from this one we are going to create our boards. I'm gonna duplicate it real quick and hide one of them, just so we can have a copy to go back to. And I'm gonna use Trim Dynamic brush. Yeah, let me switch to Trim Curve actually. And yeah, I'm gonna use that to cut our cylinder into the boards. Again, duplicate it and use only one to create the board. And make sure that you leave enough space between the boards, otherwise they will merge into a single surface and will not read as the boards. Okay, let me adjust the position of the boards. Something like this will work just fine. And let's keep doing that until we have whole shield complete. Again, if you position your, let's go slower, Control Shift click on the canvas and then drag up to make sure your line is straight up. And then if you want to adjust the point of cutting, hold spacebar on top of that and you can move it to your liking like this. Again, you can move it slightly if you don't like the spacing between the boards. Control Shift and drag like this to cut the boards. Okay, I think it should be a bit wider, so I'm gonna just move it like this. Now I don't want to do that all over again for the other side. It will be faster to just copy the ones we already have. So let me delete the original, the copy of the cylinder. Yes, delete. And now I'm gonna merge these two shorter boards to one another. I'm gonna now duplicate it, and to make things easier, I'm gonna just rotate it with the gizmo. So make sure it's straight like this, and then click and drag on the outer ring, and when you are close to the desired position, just press Shift and it will align perfectly. Now go back to the middle one and adjust the spacing like this. Now we have all 5 of them. I'm gonna merge them to show you what we got. And yeah, now you have boards on one side of the shield. And if you want to continue and adding some details, let us split them into groups. So the groups are now a bit messy because of the cutting, so I'm gonna hit Auto Groups first, and when it analyzes and groups mesh, I'm gonna click Split right here under the subtool menu, split and group split. Okay, and it will now split it into the single boards. What I want to do as well is dynamesh each of the boards to the desired resolution, which is probably 1000. And to be honest, it will be faster than to type this number 5 times. I'm gonna go back and merge the boards back again and dynamesh them all together like this, and then again split, group split. Okay, and again we have 5 boards, all with dense geometry, which is perfect. Let me switch to the first one of them and start adding some texture. Sadly, there's no easy way of doing that. If I'm being honest, it's even hard to find a reference, because usually the wooden structures inside the tree are not that well visible, so it's a bit more art than science really. You have to stylize it a bit, figure out the shapes, but I'm gonna show you some of the most common ones. So I'm gonna use a Damien standard brush, so like this. I'm gonna increase the lazy mouse a bit. What lazy mouse does is basically, if it's off, your brush is exactly where you touch, and if you turn it on and increase that number, you have that red line that will follow your cursor. So it basically makes sure that your lines are a bit more smooth, and we're gonna take advantage of it to create some interesting shapes in our board basically. And the last thing I like to do is to activate symmetry on the z-axis to make sure that I have the symbols, the lines on the both sides like this. So if you rotate, I'm gonna have it on the other side as well. Okay, and the most typical shape of the board would be something like that, and then the lines start very close to it and then gets far away as the board progresses. So something like this, and another one probably something like this. And again, it's a bit more of a art than science. There's no wrong way of doing it. You just kind of have to go with the flow, so to speak. Okay, and now let's go with the last one. As you can see, my mesh gets broken down a bit, so it's the issue of either you are too far zoomed out, your brush size is a bit too big, or your camera angle is a bit iffy. So if you adjust those 3 things, it should work better for you, like it just does for me now. You can stop in half the way and keep going in a second, like this. There is a slight error on the middle, but in this scale you don't really have to worry about that too much. And we can add some more interesting lines on the other side as well, like this and like this. So this is the most typical shape of the boards, something like this. Then for something else, the lines can go just simply like this. It's fairly easy, if I'm being honest. So you can just do something like this, and it should pass as a wood as well. There are boards that look like that as well. Again, we are getting some weird issues at the edge here, and we can either fix that by turning the lazy mouse off and going in manually and fixing that, like this, or if I'm being honest, it can actually be easier to just undo all that and go back and do that once again, but with the adjusted camera angle. And as you can see, this is the most depending on the camera angle really. So something, again, it's a bit tricky to do, but once you get the hang of it, it's not that bad. Okay. And I forgot to turn the symmetry on, but that's alright. We have the feature called mirror and weld, so let's go ahead and use that to our advantage. As you can see, my lines disappeared completely. That means I have to hit mirror first, and then mirror and weld, and then to reset the position, mirror again. And now we're good, so to speak. Okay. And let's keep going with the lines. Again, adjust the camera angle if something goes wrong, and I'm gonna try and get a better result. I want to see to switch to DC symmetry. Again, it's a bit messy. It's sometimes just like this, and you have to keep trying until you get it right. Okay, that's about right, actually. So it seems like this time it works the best if the lines are just perpendicular to the screen. Okay, something like this. Okay, as you can see, now the finish is a bit better. Okay, what else can we do? We can do a single-sided board, so something like this. Again, your imagination is your only limit, really. You can have fun with it, check the references from the photos, but don't feel too restricted by them. You can go ahead and have some freedom with this one. It doesn't really matter all that much. You'd have to do really, really badly for someone to actually point it out to you. What else? We can also do the middle one. This is fairly standard in boards as well. So you do the point like this, then you do the smallest one around it, something like this. Then another one, let's say here. And another one, maybe like this. Again, make sure to get closer with each line in the middle and go as far as possible on the outer lines. Yeah, something like this should work. Okay. And the last one, I reckon we can do something in between. So something like this. Yeah, something like this is good. You could of course just have something with just the straight lines running across the... Actually, I don't like this one, so let's undo that real quick. Sorry about my phone. I'm gonna mute it real quick. Okay, and let's redo it actually. So I'm gonna want to go a bit softer this time, like this. If you go too sharp, it looks a bit off. So I would like to fix that for you guys, in case you are getting the same result and are wondering why it looks a bit weird. That's usually the case. It's just a bit too sharp. Something like this will be better, I reckon. Okay. Let me merge them together. Okay. Let's make sure the symmetry was on. Of course it was not, but that's alright. Again, to fix that, switch from the X to Z symmetry on both of those, like this, and then hit mirror, mirror undwelled, and mirror again, and this should be fixed. Depending on your orientation, whether you work on the front or on the back, you might or may or may not have to do this mirror thing first. Sometimes just mirror and weld will work fine for you. Okay. And I'm gonna add a final little detail to our shield, and to do that I'm gonna duplicate it one last time and make sure to move it to around here and make it really thin, something like this, basically just to have the core that will never get scratched through. Then we have our boards, and I probably would like them a bit thicker. Okay, so I'm gonna add some thickness, because I'm gonna now add cloth on the front that will have holes in it, and I want to show the texture of the boards through it, so it would be perfect if they would be just underneath the surface like this. Okay, and let's switch to the original one, which will be our cloth in this example. Okay, and now I'm gonna just dynamesh the cloth real quick, like this. Dynamesh, the same resolution as with the previous stages, and I'm gonna just have fun with Damien standard brush and add some scratches to the surface. That's probably easier done without lazy mouse, and you can just basically freehand some scratches onto the surface. I'm using Alt key to switch from the adding and subtracting mass with the brush. So like this, we have nice wood structure showing through, like this, and probably one bigger hole as well to show it off real nicely. You can add some holes in the lines as well, like this. Sometimes the dots are too far from each other. You can try switching to freehand and it should help, but it doesn't always help. So keep that in mind. If you go too fast, something like this can happen even if you have freehand on. So just go slower if that happens to you, and it should be fine. Okay, I'm gonna just go around with the Damien standard brush, like this. Again, I'm only hitting Alt key on my keyboard from time to time to change from adding to subtracting, and that's it. Other than that, I'm just using the brush. I'm gonna switch to the clay buildup because it will be faster with this brush and get rid of most of the remaining mass. Okay, like this. I don't really like the part of the wood that is showing because it's a bit boring, so let me rotate it a bit and maybe find something more interesting, like this. and some final adjustments to the shape in here to make sure everything is clean and reads well from the distance. And just like that, we have finished our shield. We're gonna add straps later, but for now we can just merge those items together inside our equipment folder. Okay, I reckon that was fairly easy for you to follow. That's a quick half an hour chapter really, and this workflow will be used to create every little piece of equipment. It's basically how I operate inside ZBrush, but I'm gonna demonstrate you a few more items just to make sure you guys understand how the workflow works.